All right, so we are gonna get started first. I will introduce myself. My name is Kara. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a street medic, an organizer, all kinds of other things. I've been doing jail support for actions for a number of years now, and so that is what I'm coming to this training with. And I do also want to first acknowledge that I personally and our other facilitators are on unceded Duwamish and Coast Salish territory, and we want to honor and thank the original stewards of this land. If you are not in what is called Seattle or the surrounding areas, it'd be a good idea to look up whose land you're on so that you will know and you'll be able to introduce yourself in that way at some point in time. And I will have Ellen introduce herself, and then I'll give a little bit of info about how the training's going to go, and we'll have a little bit of chat introductions for everyone else.
Thanks, Kara. I'm Ellen. I use she, her. I wear many hats as an activist, organizer, and trainer. I kind of fell into doing legal and jail support and have been doing it for a number of years now. It's something that we'll be talking about, but it's something that is a very necessary part of actions. And particularly for those of us who may not be able to be out and about right now, it's really a valuable piece of what we all do. So neither Kara nor I are lawyers, but we do a lot of this work.
Yes, and thank you for that caveat. We are definitely not lawyers. But what we're going to do in this training is we are going to go through some things you need to think about kind of before an action, during the action, and then after the action, particularly if people have been arrested, so that you have some idea of what you could be getting into when you're out in the streets exercising your First Amendment rights to protest. So that'll be kind of the structure. If you do have questions throughout the training, feel free to pop them into the chat. I will try to get them answered throughout the training as I see them. And we're going to try to have a little question and answer at the end as well. So if your question gets missed, we'll be able to bring that back up at the end. So one thing, unfortunately, we don't get to all be together and introduce ourselves in that way. And it would be a lot on Zoom to have all the participants to speak and introduce themselves. So if you would just want to pop into the chat real quick and introduce yourself, you can put your name, your pronouns, and one thing that you hope to learn out of this training. And so, that way we'll see some questions. Also, if you want to learn something that's a question, or hopefully it's things that we'll cover. Cool. Yeah, just some basic info, what to expect and prepare for, what to do so people in jail feel supported. And I'll just read some of these out for the recording purposes. How does legal aspect operate effectively, supporting comrades and groups that might be risking arrest, providing jail and bail support, non-lawyer legal support, like how to support people. Yeah, support is a big theme. How to assist others to prepare and how to be an effective ally, getting people out as quickly and safely as possible. Yeah, definitely some stuff that we are going to address. Oh yeah, how to communicate with one another safely since we can't be in person. We'll have a little bit of touching on that as well. How to be an effective accomplice. Yeah, there's a really great zine called Accomplices Not Allies, if you can find it. It's written by a group called An Indigenous Perspective, or maybe it just says that on the front of the zine. So check that out. Let's see. Cool. And y'all can keep doing that introduction. I think we'll just move right along so we can get all this info out to you. And Ellen will give us a little bit of framing.
And before I do that, I just want to say that we are also doing closed captioning, which is new for us. We don't have the capacity to do ASL interpretation. But for those of us who are new in using that, down on the bottom where you have the menu, if you, at least in my version, if you look, there's a little more button and 3 dots. And if you click on that, you have the capacity to show subtitles, which might help you or might distract you, but feel free to engage that. We've got that available. I'll just say that it's machine automated generated, so it's not perfect. And there's a little bit of a delay factor in that as well. So that's one other thing. Karen and I have done this training, but this is the first time we are doing this training in this format online because of how we're all living right now. We will welcome any suggestions you all have in chat and afterwards about how to do this better in this particular format. It's really weird to be doing this with a screen as opposed to all of your actual friendly faces there. So just a little bit of why we're doing this, which some of you already put in the chat, is that particularly right now, it is important, and we've modified this training because things are changing pretty regularly for all of us, both people out in the streets and people not in the streets, because of the pandemics that we are all living with, both the coronavirus pandemic, but also the pandemic which is systemic racism in this country. Also the ecological pandemic that we are all facing and the smoke that some of us are again under tonight. And that previously when we have done these trainings, we've been thinking of them as particularly organized events or actions or direct actions that people are providing support for. One of the things about the world we are currently living in is that anytime we do anything, there is a possibility that we are going to interact with law enforcement in a way that results in some ones of us or other people being arrested. And it's less predictable and knowable. And therefore, it's really important that people think about what is necessary to keep themselves and other people safe. And that includes doing jail and legal support as part of that. It's different than it has been in the past, or maybe in the future, in terms of thinking about planned actions that are choreographed out or have clear organizers. And because of that, all of this is very fluid. And we need to be as flexible and, flexible is a good word, as we can be, and recognize that things are not necessarily going to go the way we imagine they're going to go. Also, I'll just throw in here, both Kara and I work from a sense of wanting to support those people who are most impacted, Black, Indigenous, people of color, other folks who are being impacted by the systems we're all facing, and that we try in our work to prioritize those needs in general, but also when dealing with the legal system, because people face very different consequences and different reactions from both police and from the legal system, so-called legal system. I think I'm going to stop and kick it back to Kara.
All right, so one more thing before we dive into some of the things to start planning for is I want to give a quick little shout out to security culture. This is not a security culture training or workshop. I have taught those in the past. There's been another one that 350 Seattle had put on recently that is on the videos page. We'll drop that link in the chat soon. You should definitely educate yourself about security culture. There is a rich history in this country of the state and federal entities trying to gather information from activists. They do all kinds of things. It used to be they had to infiltrate your movement and be with you in person, but now we have these really handy little devices with us all the time, and they are just tracking us like crazy, and they are paying attention to the things you say. So a really important piece of understanding legal implications I don't know what I was trying to say, of these actions is to make sure that you're not starting off by putting a bunch of information out there that could contribute to a legal case later. Um, so you definitely want to make sure that you are communicating in good ways, using encrypted messaging apps, talking just in person without any technology around, and definitely keeping those things in mind when you are getting ready for and going to an action. And so there's so much information about that. That is not what this specific training is going to address, but do know that you need to look up some information about that. Another piece of that is operational security. So an easy way to say that is you only know what you need to know. And if you don't need to know something, you don't want to know it. You want to be able to, if called to the stand and asked a question under oath, did you know about this thing? You want to be able to say no, you didn't. It's the easiest way to do it. So if you're a person that really wants to know everything about an action and you hear somebody's planning one, try to temper some of that curiosity and only know what you need to know rather than wanting to know everything, because that can be a lot more dangerous. One other thing I want to add is that most of this information does apply to anyone, but when it gets to specifics around being arrested and going to jail and what types of like fines and charges you would get, if you are someone who's a youth under the age of 18, or if you're working with youth, things are going to be different for them because the Juvenile Justice Act in Washington State does specify different things for youth. And so, you know, when you get arrested, you'll be taken to the juvie instead of the adult jail if you're under 18. There's different punishments for different crimes. Those are on the Washington State website. And so we're not really we don't have enough time to really dive into all the differences between those things. But do know that the First Amendment, as it's written, applies to everyone, no matter your age. You do have the right to be protesting, but if something happens and you are interacting with the state, you're going to have a little bit of differences around where you go and how you're treated afterwards. Yeah. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ellen and we'll get into some pre-action info.
Okay, one thing just to add to what Kara said is, while we are in Washington State and we are most familiar with that, the things that they just said about juveniles applies, in my experience, in other states as well. So just if you happen to be elsewhere, just look it up. It certainly applies to the youth, but it also applies to you if you're the person or people doing support for them and trying to get them out of a youth facility. There are probably going to be different things you need to do that we're not really going to talk about. Because when Kara and I were talking about this, we perceive times as being different, we have framed this as how to prepare in general for the possibility of arrests being out in the streets, whether or not it's like an intention to risk arrest. It is quite often that in recent days, in recent months, people have been grabbed for doing nothing in particular. or in doing something very specific, and maybe they planned it or maybe they haven't. If you are out in the streets and they're clear organizers of an action, they may have figured out or have plans for some of these things we're going to talk about. But often these days, and I think we anticipate leading up to the election and whatever goes on, there will be a lot of people pouring into the streets, as there have been over the last 7 months, 5 months, whatever. And there may not be that clear delineation of leadership. So there may or may not be people who are set up to do legal support or to be a legal team. The first thing people should think about is your own, if you are out in the street or if you're choosing not to be, is to think about your own personal risk level. Where you are in what you're willing to do or not do. So sometimes there are legal support people, we're going to talk about this, who will be out in the street with other people. Sometimes there are legal support people who are going to be off-site away from that. And depending on where you fall and what your comfort level is and what your ability to take on risk is, you may want to determine what you're doing based on that. Regardless, if you were going into the street, no matter what your intention, if you're doing legal, we talk about this in other trainings, don't go by yourself. Have a buddy, have a team, have a group of people you're with. It's to ensure your safety, other people's safety, and also if something goes sideways, hopefully to ensure that someone has observed what has happened and is able to respond and show up. Ideally, I'm seeing somebody saying, are there written materials? We're going to share an email with people afterwards with some information that we're talking about and some other information. So we will be giving people those resources after the training. If you are part of a group that is planning something, or maybe even if you're not, you might want to know what local laws and where the jails are and possible charges people might be facing. Here in Seattle, it's fairly standard, and I think people are aware of misdemeanor charges that Kara's going to talk about in a bit, I think, and what the possible consequences are. It's good to know where King County Jail is if you're in King County in Seattle, so that you can, as jail support people, plan around that. Or if you're in Tacoma, where the Pierce County Jail is. All of those sorts of things are things that can be thought about in advance. You don't have to know in advance, but it's helpful. The other thing to think about, honestly, is if you're working with a group, or even if you're not, what you're prepared to do sort of post-arrest in terms of supporting people. I am going to go back and forth, ideally. I mentioned having legal observers potentially. So there are a number of different resources. You may choose to have someone available. Here in Seattle, we happen to have the National Lawyers Guild, which is available for demonstrations. Their current hotline is very nicely, okay, try me. They just happen to get that. And that is for people to use if they are arrested or someone they know are arrested while you're out in the street. They may not be the ones who are going to immediately respond, but they will be tracking people. If you are involved in organizing an event and you want to have people in the streets who are going to be with their green hats often, with little notepads, taking notes and observing, particularly the police, you can make a request. I just put in chat to the Seattle Legal Observer request line, which is again the National Lawyers Guild here in Seattle. And there is, a general contact for the National Lawyers Guild. They're really great, they're really useful, and they're really, as lawyers are and observers are all over the place, stretched really thin right now, trying to be out in the streets, trying to support people and do what they can. So one of the things to think about, if you're one of those people who's comfortable being out in the street and wants to take on a function, one of the things you can do is to be an observer yourself. Understanding that, particularly of late, the Seattle police have started targeting people who are doing that particular function, as they did, I'll say my experience at Standing Rock was that legal observers, as well as medics and Indigenous people in that case, and Black people and people of color, who would be targeted or pulled out for particular treatment by the police. So it's just something to pay attention to. I'm going to turn it over to Kara to talk a little bit more about how you might track yourself and other people out there.
Yes. And there was a question in the chat about what actually happens after someone who's been arrested calls the NLG. You know, they start doing all their lawyer stuff. They have ways to look up information about your arrest that is not what's available publicly, which I'll speak a little bit about what's available publicly later. And so they're going to start the process of figuring out what charges are and just paying more attention from the legal side. Someone also just asked if you can still protest if you're a legal observer. You can be physically at the protest, but if you are a legal observer, you need to be objective. And you need to be just paying attention to what's happening so that you can take as many notes and detailed objective information as possible. So that's just something to think about.
Let me just also throw in, which I skipped over, the advantage of having a lawyer or a legal aid person do the observing is that they have certain protections about what they're recording, what they're writing down. Whereas I, as a non-legal person, I can observe, but it is possible for the court to require me to turn that information over. So that is one argument for having those folks do it.
Right, and that goes into the question that was just asked in the chat. If, for example, the NLG footage can be required to be turned over to SPD, no, because they have the client lawyer privilege. And so they wouldn't turn the footage over unless it like goes to trial and you've decided that you want that footage to be turned over. It's not the thing with like journalists can be required to turn the footage over. Someone's asking, when you're not in a green hat, can you still protest? I mean, you can protest whenever you want. It's just a matter of what people are going to believe. If you are seen as somebody who's up at the front lines, like yelling with a sign, and then you try to say that you're being an objective observer, it's not going to be seen as objective because you're clearly involved in the action. And so you're not an official legal observer, you're just an observer. So there's two different distinctions there of people who are just observing and have information, which can be good and useful in a court case, but being a legal observer, you are an objective standing off. That's why all the folks in the green hats usually are just standing there. You don't see them communicating with people and trying to really be part of the action. They're just there.
Even observing. If they happen to be your friends, they don't usually engage with you when they're wearing their green hats. They're trying to maintain a certain professional level that just Kara or I or whoever wouldn't necessarily be doing.
Yeah. So one thing that is really important to do before you leave, one thing that we've taught when we are teaching, as Ellen mentioned, like the jail and legal support role and doing this in kind of an organized format with an organization, is we have folks fill out a direct action support form. And this will have a bunch of information so that if you do happen to get arrested, we would know how to find you in the system. And And so one thing you can do is you can either have people fill out these really extensive support forms, or I used to live in a house where me and my housemates just all made a little note card with our name, like legal name, and emergency contact information, and like who to call. Like if I'm in jail for 3 days, call this boss of mine and tell them I won't be at work. So it's really good to write down some of that information so people can know what to do. So real quick, I'm going to share my screen, provided that I can do that well. Yeah. Yes, I'm going to do that and show you the direct action support form. Am I doing that? I am doing that. So this is just a very in-depth form. An important thing about this is if you have this, you do not ever, ever, ever want to fill this out online. This is currently a Google Doc. Do not ever fill it out as a Google Doc and save it in your Google Drive. That is something that can be discoverable by subpoena, that Google will happily give up your information to the court. And this, they will say, and have said in cases before, is an indication that you knowingly knew you were going to go and commit a crime because you already filled out a form showing your intent to get arrested, which is actually why we no longer call it a jail support form and are just calling it a direct action support form, or even could just be action support, because you do not want them to have any type of way of saying that you were trying to break the law. But this has a lot of information: your name, your full legal name, date of birth, gender listed on your ID, because that's how they're going to book you in the system. An address, you'll need that so that if they mail you charges or mail you anything, it will be helpful to have that information. Phone number, email. This is a lot. And again, this is we've used this organizationally, so there's a lot more questions. Like phone number and email, that's so we can contact you later. If you're just going out with your friends, they probably have all your contact info. So this wouldn't necessarily be important. We're going to go over bail and bond later, but this form asks if you want to be bailed out, bonded out. When do you have to be out of the action, if possible, out of jail? This is important because you may not always be you can't just get out of jail because you want to if you've been arrested. There are rules, like if you are being held for a misdemeanor in Washington, you can only be held for 72 hours. So if it's a misdemeanor charges, after 72 hours, if you haven't been bailed out or bonded out or PR'd or anything else, you are definitely, 72 hours, you'll be out. Felonies are 90 days. So if you've been arrested for a felony and can't manage to get out for some reason or another, you would be in jail up to 90 days. Now that's very unlikely for many reasons, but those are just the maximum time they can hold you without you going to court. So other things this asks about is medications. It has some emergency contact information, and then anything you need when you get out of jail. Because jail support, which we'll talk about later, also includes hanging out and seeing people get out of jail because they've just had a really traumatic experience. So we will be providing this in the follow-up email. And again, do not fill it out on the internet. And if you print it and fill it out, very important up here in italics, make sure to destroy the forms after the action once they are no longer needed. I'm talking shred them, have a ritual bonfire when it's safe to have fires outside, which is not now. Do something, anything to make sure that this form is destroyed, because this is people's personal information and you do not want this just floating around. So it's very important that you treat this like the really important document that it is. So stop sharing that screen there. So that's a way to like make sure some information is there. And again, like that's where you can put stuff about, oh, I need you to let out my dog at 6 p.m. My car is parked in this location in a 2-hour parking, and my friend Joe has my keys, and so we'll need to move the car. Like all that stuff is stuff you want to think about. Um, so another thing that you'll want to do that's really important is to go to a know your rights briefing. Um, know your rights briefings can be taught by lawyers, they can be taught by non-lawyers. There's a lot of different ways to get this information, but you do have rights in this country. And so it's important to know what those are. Um, it's also important in knowing that to know that the police can violate those rights and they can lie to you. And you may have to wait until your day in court to assert those rights. Um, so it doesn't mean just because you know your rights that you're not going to get arrested for standing around at a protest doing nothing. I think we've all seen recently, some of us have been seeing this for years, and other folks maybe are just now seeing recently the way that police act with people who are literally just standing there. So it's important to go to these know your rights trainings so you know what your rights are. And there are a few that we can put in the chat here.
You want me to do that, Kara?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great. And yeah, so Ellen's going to put some in there. The Seattle NLG has done one recently as part of these training series videos that 350 Seattle's doing. So that's on their website. The Civil Liberties Defense Center out of Eugene, Oregon has a lot of really awesome resources. That link, their video for Know Your Rights actually isn't up there anymore, but their website is so really amazing and has a lot of information. So you'll really want to check out their website anyway. Yeah. And one question I do want to address up here in the chat, what about instances of sustained direct action, and how would you hold on to people's info safely for a long period of time? That's a really great question, especially as we see the thing about dying states historically. I'm going to try not to get too out there right now, but it's historically, when empires are falling, they are going to come at you with everything they've got in their dying death rattle. And that's what we're living in right now. So if you are holding on to people's forms and you're not going out in the streets, but somehow, you get connected as a person who is involved and the police may somehow get a warrant to search your house, like that's a possibility and something to consider. But I think we're not quite to that point just yet. And so you can just safely put them, like if you don't have a locked safe or something at your house, maybe put them in a folder and put that folder under like 15 books on your bookshelf or like behind your TV or somewhere, and just have it and have that information. If an action is going to be kind of ongoing, then that way you can have the information and it will be as safe as possible. And at the end of the day, with technology the way it is and with possibilities, it's possible that information will be discovered anyway, but we are stronger together, and the more of us that there are doing this, the harder it is for them to process and deal with all of us. So that's pretty important to consider.
I'm going to throw in here just a question that I know people have asked me about, which is about rotating legal support people who are off-site. So one of the things to consider in that scenario of something that's ongoing is transferring, whether it's on note cards or the forms that Kara just shared with you all, that information. I've been at home, but I'm going to go to the site. So I'm going to get that information to someone who's also going to stay off site, so that that information is readily attainable if it needs to be.
Yeah.
Don't go to the action and leave everything in your house all locked up and then nobody can get to it.
Right. That is a good addition. So one thing with the Know Your Rights, we're not going to do this isn't a whole Know Your Rights training. Those are actually kind of long too. I know the CLDCs is like an hour and a half. I think the 350 Seattle one was maybe about an hour.
That's right.
Um, so you do want to do something more than that, but I am going to show you right quick this little slide that Ellen and I have used in this training before. And these are what we call our magic phrases. So I'm going to do that. Whew. Is this annoying little box? Can you see that? Okay, cool. Why is this weird? Okay. So these magic phrases, um, these are things you want to learn. And the first one is, am I being detained or am I free to go? So if a police officer comes up to you and starts talking to you, first of all, don't talk to cops. We're going to talk a little more about that later, but you have no reason to talk to the police at all. They are trying to get information from you. They are going to try to act like your friend and be like, hey, so this is all really cool action. Like, who planned it? Who's in charge here? You don't ever want to answer those questions. So you don't want to talk to the cops at all because it's just easier for everyone involved to not talk to them. So if they start talking to you and you don't feel comfortable just starting to walk away, you can say, am I being detained or am I free to go? And if they say, no, you're not being detained, walk away. Do not stand near them. Do not give them any reason to continue to talk to you or to think that you're wanting to talk to them. Walk away from them. Even if you had the best view of the thing that you were watching and you could hear really well, all the speakers, walk away if you're not being detained. Then if they say, no, you're under arrest, and at some point you're under arrest, you should say, I do not consent to any searches, but I am not resisting. So that way you've expressed your right to not consent to any searches, but you've also mentioned out loud, in case they're recording with their body cams, which in Seattle they should be, you've mentioned that you're not resisting the search at all, even though you don't want it to happen. And that's important for future trial things that could happen. Another thing, if you are under arrest, you will say, I want to speak to an attorney or I want to speak to a lawyer and I wish to remain silent. And that's it. So practice these, say these phrases, like look in the mirror and say them. Try to memorize them. Oh, I wish I had my other water bottle. The CLDC has these stickers that have them on there. So if you have them on your water bottle, you can like look at them while it's happening. So these are really important things to learn and to know so that you are asserting your rights. Some people want to say like, I invoke my Fifth Amendment. But don't say that. You don't need to say that. There's various reasons that I've heard from lawyers about why not to say it that way. Just say, I wish to remain silent. If you have been arrested and you are being harmed in some way, or like if you need to go to the bathroom, if your handcuffs are on too tight, you should say something about that. Also to point out, if you have to go to the bathroom, they don't have to let you go. So you can say that and you may not get that request honored. And same with the handcuffs. Like you could say, these are too tight, they're hurting me, and they may not do anything about it. Make sure to take note of that for a future trial because that is cruel. But after you've said those things, expressed your needs and said the things that you needed, you should re-invoke, you should re-say, I wish to remain silent. So they know that you are not going to talk to them. So yes. If you're in a car as part of a protest and you can't walk away, if you're not being detained, you just roll up your window. I mean, probably what we've been seeing them do because they want to arrest people. I mean, I saw that video where they like smashed out somebody's window. And so that's going to happen. And this is again where it gets down to you have rights and the police are able to violate those rights until they are taken to court and enough evidence is assembled So kind of some of this really is like going out there and knowing what how things should be, and that the possibility that they could be very different than what they should be. Um, and it's unfortunate, and that's just, I mean, that's a whole reason as to why our system is so incredibly problematic. Um, so those are some magic phrases. The next thing, oh, I should have looked at my notes better, because now I'm going to show you a couple slides about what to bring and what not to bring. If you happen to be, I'll just start sharing my screen again. If you were on any of the health and safety trainings recently, then these may look familiar to you because I don't like to double up my work. So we will send these out. I wanted to keep this protester packing list because this is all really good information about what to take to a protest, but I put in bold the things I'm going to talk about and what's relevant to this training specifically. This is something really important to have. This is your emergency offsite contact and your local NLG numbers. This is something you want to write on your body with a Sharpie. Pen is you're gonna sweat it off. It's gonna rub off. If it's cold, you really want to write it on with a Sharpie. A lot of people will write it on their arms. You may want to write it somewhere else, like your leg or your stomach, or somewhere you'll be able to look at it while you're in jail, but that when you're walking down the street after the action, you won't have this big Sharpie number on your arm. So an officer can look at you and say, I bet that person was just at the protest because they have a number written on their arm. I'm going to go after them and do something to try to mess with them. So just think about that when you're thinking about where you're going to write it. And you'll want to have both an emergency contact and the NLG number if that hotline has been activated, so that you can call those people when you're in jail. When you are in the King County jail, you actually get 3 phone calls, unless they have changed that since January of 2019, which was the last time I was in the King County jail. But I think I've heard recently that it's the same. So you would want to be able to call people offsite, like your emergency contact or your friend who has your information card, and say, okay, friend, I've been arrested. Activate what it says on that card, like feed my dog, call my boss, pick up my kids, whatever. So the other thing you're going to want to have is either cash or an ATM card. For when you get out, in case you need to take a bus or get some food, hopefully jail support folks are there and there's food and rides available for you, but that's good stuff to have. And we're going to talk a little bit briefly about the ID. So in the state of Washington, you only need to have your identification on you if you are operating a motor vehicle or purchasing alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, or firearms. So those are the times you're required to have an ID in Washington state. You are not required to have an ID when you're standing on a street. There are various reasons that people may choose not to have IDs on them. Most often in solidarity with folks in their group who are maybe undocumented, or maybe trans folks that haven't been able to update their ID to reflect their gender, or somebody who lost their ID and just can't afford to buy a new one. So in solidarity with them, you could choose to not have your ID. However, when you get arrested and they ask your name, you are required to tell them your name. If you lie, they will eventually find out your name, and you could get an additional charge for lying, because again, you are not allowed to lie to the police, even though they are allowed to lie to you. So you would still say your name, and it's really just the solidarity with your friends for not having the ID. And it takes them a little bit longer to figure out that you are who you say you are, but they'll figure it out eventually. So make them work for it. And that way you won't lose your ID. Because another thing that happened, especially what we saw at Standing Rock a lot, is that people would get arrested and they take things away from you when you're arrested, but then when they let you out, they say, "Oh, you didn't have that. You didn't have a cell phone on you. You didn't have that spiritual item that you're asking us about." That happened all the time in North Dakota. So, and it's happened here as well, in King County. So you really want to consider what you're carrying and make sure it's not something that you want to lose. Um, and in that vein, we have a slide for what not to bring or consider leaving behind. Anything that can be considered a weapon. There's actually a story from a smaller town in Washington that is now funny, with the umbrellas that have gotten all popular at protests here in Seattle. Somebody walked into a convenience store in a small town in Washington with an umbrella strapped to their back, one of those really big umbrellas. And somebody called the cops and said, like, this person has a gun. And this whole thing happened, even though Washington's actually an open carry state, so that person could have walked in with a rifle on their back. But this whole thing happened because they thought the umbrella was a weapon. So consider things that might be a weapon. Like if you carry a pocket knife, the police might say that, you had that and you were going to use it on them. They may not. So just consider that when you are packing. Anything you don't want found in a search, such as drugs, drug paraphernalia, sensitive information about your life or friends, especially sensitive information related to organizing or anything about the action or any of your comrades. You don't want anything written down. And a phone, if you're bringing your phone, you do not want it to be unlocked. And very importantly, because I know some people really love this feature of thumbprints or Face ID, do not have that on your phone. They can force you to open your phone if it is locked with a thumbprint or Face ID, because we haven't had a legal precedent set yet in this country that biometrics like that are invasive. Whereas something like a PIN number or the swipey shape that you do or a PIN word, that's private information. And so you cannot be forced to give that information up to unlock your phone. But your biometrics, since that stuff is kind of new, there has not yet been legal precedent set to prevent that from being forced upon you. So you do not want to use those features. So that is something to consider there. Let's see. I think that, yeah. Oh, and then very important part about the buddy. I know we've mentioned it before, but make sure you have a buddy with you. You really want somebody to know what's going on. If your buddy gets arrested with you, that's why it's maybe important to have more people around, like more of affinity group or other things. So that is important. Let's see, if you're arrested, should your emergency contact let your employer know you've been arrested, or can they call out sick for you? Legal ramifications for an employer knowing you've been arrested. That's, it kind of depends on your employer. It really does. I have friends who are teachers who, before COVID, would go masked up to protest the way a lot of us street medics do because we've been targeted by the cops so much. And so these teachers would say, they didn't want to be seen in the background of some shop because if their employer saw them at a protest, they could be fired. And so I don't know, what those rules are. It's really something it depends on your employer. And so there could be legal ramifications. It's up to you to find that out with your employer. You could have your emergency contact call your employer and say, oh, this person is sick and they're not able to make it, because you could be so sick that, you couldn't make the phone call. That's fine. But they might find out that you've been arrested if they do background checks or have any kind of certain county jobs, especially the county, because you're arrested by the county. They have all these discussions. I don't know, Ellen, do you have
Yeah,
something to add?
I was just going to add, it's also a question of timing, right? So it might be that you get arrested and released or are going to be released before this becomes an issue with your employer. So one thing to consider when you're talking with your friends about going out in the street is, again, that timeline of when you need to let someone know something. I'm not showing up for my shift, or you need to go pick up my kid from childcare, or, you know, the dog needs to be walked, which are less loaded things, but frankly more important than your employer, in my opinion. But it's the, don't jump in and have somebody call your employer if it turns out you're going to be released quickly, which has often been the case lately. It's not that it's fast and you get out when you want to get out immediately and it's frustrating, but you may be out before it's an issue. Don't make it an issue before it already is, I think, is my caution here.
Yeah. And I think it's your time anyway, Ellen. I feel like I've been talking for 6 hours.
Yeah, we gave you the bulk of everything.
Oh no.
And Vivian just noted, hi Vivian, is that it is different with your employer. Being arrested is a different level of concern than being convicted. So in many cases, the things that are of concern for teachers and healthcare workers and others is the conviction, which is not what's happening when you've just been arrested. I think we're going to move into, I'll just add one other thing back with the buddy question. Actually, somebody asked this question and I answered it on chat. So about the question about not giving your name when you're arrested. If you don't have your ID with you and you don't give your name, people wanted to know what that would be. Really what that is partially messing with the system. It's not like they're not going to figure out who you are. If you're not cooperating, they're going to fingerprint you and figure out who you are anyway. It will slow the process down. If you are doing it as an individual, it's going to slow you down relative to other people you were perhaps arrested at the same time as. If you're going to do that, if you're not going to cooperate in any way, let people, your support people, the other people you're in jail with know. We recently, well, a long time ago now, but last year we had an experience of someone I know whose name was something other than what we're looking for in the system, which Kara's going to talk about in a bit. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out where this person was. And it turned out they had just they just had a different name for the person. If you're going to try and have a bunch of people not give names, again, not going to ultimately make that much of a difference. It may make you feel like you're really saying, no, we're not cooperating with this messed up racist system. That's not a bad reason to do it, but don't expect it to magically mean you all get released without giving names or something. That's not the way, given all of the ability they have to figure out who we all are, it's not really going to stop things from proceeding. The other thing about making sure you have a buddy, and even if you don't have a buddy, if you're being arrested and someone, legal observer or an observer who's paying attention asks you what's your name, feel free to tell them what your name is, because then they're going to be able to tell support people so they can easily track you. That's if you're separated somehow or other from people who know you. Moving again, we're sort of going back and forth, and we said we were going to do before and after, but this all mushes together in many ways. One of the things to consider always, but particularly these days, is that people out in the streets have a diversity of tactics. There are a lot of different ideas and philosophies and attitudes about what people want to be doing. So just, you know, you are not the controlling factor in all of this, particularly if you are a white person of a certain age. I would encourage you to not assume that your way of protesting is the only way of protesting or being out in the street, and to take leadership from people who are more impacted often than I am, we are, from that. And also to, again, what you don't know, and you can't testify to. So if you see something happening that you're not going to want to be a part of, move someplace else, honestly. Just separate yourself out physically, unless you're making the choice to stand with people and to help them and protect them in some way. And you need to be conscious of what's going on around you, both for that and for paying attention to what the authorities are doing, or honestly these days, what the Proud Boys or whoever are doing. So you want to keep your wits about you and look around and have, I think Kara used the term head on a swivel. So just pay attention to what's going on around you. For people who are off-site, often these days, like myself, I'm very frustrated not being in the middle of things personally, because I like to be there, but I can't be. There are ways to be helpful. One is to watch the live streams that are going on right now, and you can help both track for yourself and for the future, but also to communicate with people you know in the middle of the street who can't tell what's going on someplace else. So oftentimes of late, there are multiple things going on, and people see in the street, even swiveling their head, what's right around them. They don't see what's 5 blocks away or across town. And you might be the person who is able to communicate that, to know what's happening and help them. The other thing that we're about to talk about is you can help, in addition to holding those magic forms or index cards or whatever, you can help track arrests, which we're going to talk about. Often with big planned actions, there is some sort of legal team offsite at some command center or whatever. These days, that's not so much happening for a lot of different reasons, partially because the events aren't organized in that way, and also because we're all separated. It doesn't mean you can't cooperate with other people doing the same function and help keep track of people as they are arrested. The reason, in case it hasn't been clear to now, not to have people's information in forms or index cards or whatever on site is that things happen. And I usually tell, and will tell this story yet again, of trying to do too many things at once and having a lot of legal forms on me at an action many years ago. And I ended up getting arrested because I was doing something else and not paying attention. I was also talking to, doing media stuff and walking with the media. And we crossed an invisible line and I got grabbed and the media proceeded on. And I had all of the information. And because we did it like that, I had all of the bail money on me. So the legal people had to bail me out in order to get all of that information. We got it all back, but we could easily not have gotten back the information, both about the people and also all that cash. So I kind of berate people about this a lot, but really pay attention to that sensitive information. It's sensitive. It needs to be away from where the action is. And yes, as Kara mentioned, in the world we currently live with, it's possible, even sitting at my house right now, talking to you, the door could be knocking, somebody could be knocking on the door, coming in with a warrant. But that's less likely at the moment, although who knows going forward. We already talked about the National Lawyers Guild observers versus your own observers and what the pros and cons are there. I think I put in just in text that one of the things that is possible is that if you're planning a particular action as a group and you know that there are laws that are going to be skirted around or broken, lawyers, legal observers, aren't going to want to know that. So it might be with direct actions, in particular, if you're going to go do something, you're going to want your own observers there, or a general call out for a legal observer to be at some location where someone you know can take them to where something is happening, rather than giving them advance information, because they're under, again, a different set of rules than the rest of us as just organizers and activists are. One of the things about tracking people, sitting on your computer, by the phone, etc., and it's also true for sitting in jail, is that everything takes longer than you think it should. So there's a lot of time doing jail support that's very boring. That's like you're sitting, reading your book, or doing some other work, or chatting with people, or whatever. Because once people have been arrested, there's a lapse of a lot of time frequently between them being taken into custody and being processed to the point where they appear in a system that you can track them. And people should just be aware of that. The other last thing I think I'll say before we talk a little bit about what that booking might look like is that having in advance, if possible, again, everything is if possible these days, but if possible, have a thought out plan about how you're going to track people. Again, you're not going to want to do it in some form of electronically shared document. Same reason as why you don't want to keep a legal form online. They can be subpoenaed, they can be accessed by other people. It's old school, or some encrypted manner that you might be able to do that with. But you need to think about that so you're tracking people safely for them and for you. And I think it's back to you to talk about booking.
Woohoo. Cool. And someone had asked if a green card holder can be deported without being convicted. That is a legal question. It's a good question. I don't know the answer. Ellen, do you know the answer?
I do not know the answer, but again, that's one of those, I think they probably can do it. Whether it's legal or not is a different question. They certainly can take somebody, although in King County, they're supposed to not be cooperating with ICE. They could take somebody from jail straight to the Tacoma Detention Center, potentially. So it's something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And there are lots of people who probably can answer that question way better than we can, who work on immigration issues and to close the detention center and all sorts of other things. So
yeah, it's probably out there, the answer. So one of the things that we have mentioned, as Ellen mentioned, that it can take a long time when you are the person waiting to see if someone's been arrested. I also want to just mention the other side of that. When you're the person in jail, a long time does not even begin to describe what you are experiencing. Jail is meant to dehumanize people. That is literally its purpose. So you are in a room, when you go to jail, you are forced to change your clothes into jail clothes. You are put in a holding cell room with other people. There is no clock. There are no windows. You have no idea what time it is, how long you've been there, anything like that. It is a very long time. So do a little bit of like deep breathing and preparing yourself for that before you go in, that you will be experiencing something traumatic. That's what they want. They want you to feel so traumatized that you won't do things again. And then they're also traumatizing people for really ridiculous things like not paying parking tickets and all kinds of other things that a racist system like this and classist will do. So though, for when you are at home trying to help people, I'm going to post this link in the chat right here.
I just did.
Okay. Ellen's on it. This is where you can go to look up if someone has been arrested. And this is once they've been booked. So the booking process can take a really, really, really long time. So you're honestly just kind of hitting refresh on this thing. There's no way to know how long booking is going to take. It depends on how many other people are being arrested at the action, how many other people are being arrested in general that day in King County, um, how quickly they go through the whole booking process, because there's this whole other process before you even get to the jail. Sometimes it depends on if they take you to a satellite location first and then the county jail, or if you just get taken to the county jail. Um, so just know that it's going to take a long time. If you're the person, if you know for sure your friend got arrested and you go to this website and you're looking for them and they're not there, don't freak out immediately, because it probably is just going to take a really, really long time. Um, or it could be a situation like Ellen mentioned, where somebody um, had a different name or gave a different name. And this kind of goes into a story I'm going to tell about a time that Ellen and I did jail support at an action down in Tacoma against the Tacoma LNG facility in collaboration with the Puyallup tribe. We did an action called Block the Gates. And folks were doing direct action to block the gate so construction workers couldn't get in. And we had everybody, we always ask everybody to fill out these direct action support forms, even people who are not in the sort of arrestable group. But just because we know that anybody potentially on site has the ability to be arrested by the police if they just decide to arrest people. So we have everybody fill them out. And we had something like 150 support forms that were filled out, that we got filled out. And the action's happening, it's almost over, no one's going to be arrested. And the tribe has asked, okay, we're going to stand down. And a couple people, they just stay there and they get arrested after they refuse to leave the street when the police have said, you have to leave or you'll be arrested. And those two people are pretty much the only people that didn't fill out support forms. We had no idea who they were. We're looking through these like 150 forms, trying to find their information. We're asking, who knows their names? Does anyone know their names? Anyone who is there? I mean, we're in a basement somewhere where we've been since before the sun came up and beyond when the sun went down, trying to find out who are these people who were arrested. We had to do all kinds of things. And eventually we found out who they were. We had some lawyers helping us find out who they were from the other side. And that's how we found out that one of the people who'd been arrested had refused to give a name. And so it was entered in the system as Jane Doe. And, you know, we kept calling and telling the lawyers we were working with, this is this person's name. Like, this is what her name is. This is what everyone says her name is. And even the lawyers were like, I don't know. Oh, but we do have a Jane Doe that was arrested. And it was because she had refused to give the name. So that was kind of a multi-part story to illustrate how it's important to have the forms so that the folks trying to track can look you up. And it's important to know that you know, should also, if you don't tell your name, it's going to be a lot harder for people to do stuff.
And also in these situations that we're in now, when people are randomly being picked up, to make sure somebody knows what your name is. And in her case, she was planning she decided not to cooperate, and it was in keeping apparently with what someone who knew her would have expected her to do, but we didn't know that. Nobody knew that. So to communicate with your support people, if you're thinking you're going to do something like that, so they know.
Yes. And I want to address real quick before I go on this question in the chat that said, would you please say something about being careful to not spread rumors, be precise about the source of information, and be organized about having one point of contact between your group and groups like NLG and PSPS to avoid overwhelming those groups with redundant and or unconfirmed info. If you've ever met me in person, you probably heard me like go off for almost an hour about spreading rumors. As a street medic, it is one of the main things we do is rumor control. And it is so important. This is a very important point. And in fact, I am going to include the slide on the salute from our health and safety training. You definitely never want to share info that you don't know is true. You want to make sure you're only saying things like, I saw 6 people walking north on Pine, and share that information. Don't say, I heard there's, 30 federal agents headed our way. Maybe there are, like, but did you see it? Who did you hear it from? This is like a really important thing to consider. And especially if you are working with other groups, you want to make sure that you are only giving them the information that they need and that you know is correct, and that it's really important to only have that one point of contact, so that there's not 5 or 6 people contacting the NLG all looking for the same person. You really want to make sure that they are important. Um, Sorry, does this include language like allegedly arrested for? Yes. And you would want to say that. Allegedly arrested for, or something to indicate. You would never want to say, this person was criminal trespassing. Um, the word allegedly should become a huge part of your vocabulary. It's really important. Um, and yeah, and you definitely only want to share information that you know is true, and with is who needs to know it. So not just anybody. Like, you don't need to go onto Facebook and say, oh my God, I think so and so just got arrested. That's a bad idea. Um, just communicate with the people you need to communicate. If someone asks if they're arrested by federal agents, what are the next steps? Um, it is it's a little more difficult, I learned this summer, having to find somebody arrested by federal agents. Um, there's a few federal facilities. There's one down in Tacoma, or is it Skyway? It's somewhere down there.
Detail.
SeaTac, yes. So you can go to the SeaTac Detention Center website and look up people in the same way. Um, that hasn't been as common. Like, usually if you're arrested at a protest, most common is to be arrested by Seattle police or King County police, perhaps if you're in like unincorporated King County or outside the city limits. But the SeaTac Detention Center is where you could look up federal agent arrestees. You can just Google that. Um,
And I'll just throw in the federal processing takes even longer than the local, municipal, and county processing because they go through more red tape. So it's going to be even longer.
yeah. So I am going to now show a couple slides again. My favorite, screen sharing. Let me make sure I have these ready to talk about the difference between bail and bond, and to mention what we've called personal recognizance. Um, so these are things, and these slides I'm about to share, I know they are very wordy and that they are not cute. But the reason I left them wordy is because I'm going to send them to you, and I want you to have all this information. I would have liked to make them prettier, but I just want all this to get out there. So when you are arrested for something, you are usually assigned an amount of bail. And that's just the money that the state is going to charge you to be released from jail for your alleged crime after you've been arrested. And it lets you get out of jail before your court date. So if you pay that full amount and post your bail, once you've gone through all of the court dates and all of these processes, you will get the money back with fees taken out, court costs, depending on the situation. Like, it's, you're not always going to get all of it back, but it's possible you could get some of it back. And just to give you an example of bail for misdemeanor charges in Washington state, bail can be up to $1,000 per charge for a misdemeanor. Sometimes they're 500, sometimes they're 1,000, and then the judge can also set anything below that. Like, if it's a misdemeanor with $1,000 bail, it's possible they could set it lower, but usually they just go ahead and set for the maximum. Felony charges can be way more. We don't see a lot of felony charges in protests, but I think some of those can be up to like $5,000 a charge, or maybe 10. I forgot.
There's some that go up to 10.
Yeah, okay, that's what I knew. I was like, I think it's a similar number to 1,000, but with more zeros. Um, so that is bail. It is you personally paying the full amount that they've asked for so that you can get out of jail. If you don't have that entire bail amount, you can post bond through a bonding agency. Um, this is often about 10% is most common for bond, and you have to call the agency, and you can call them from jail, or somebody can call on your behalf, and that bonding agency will pay the full bail to get you out of jail. You just pay them the 10%, but they pay the full amount under the assumption that you will go to court. But if you do not go to court, they will come find you. If you've ever seen the show Dog the Bounty Hunter, that's what Dog is hunting, is people who got bonded out and then didn't go to court and then tried to hide. Another thing is that you will not get any of the money back. So when you pay that 10%, that's it, it's gone. And so if you don't make your court appearances, they're going to ask you to pay the other 90% because they already paid it for you and they're mad about it. So you will want to make sure you go to all your court dates. You will lose that money. And sometimes, depending on where you are in the world, a bonding agency could do something really shady, like also charge you extra money for gas to come pick you up from jail. There's a story from a friend about that. So these are just two things to think about when you're trying to decide, like, if I get arrested, am I going to bail myself, get bailed or bonded out? These are the things to consider. Now, one thing people get really excited about trying to figure out, oh, should I bail myself out? Should I bond myself out? But there are, when you're protesting, a lot of times, especially if you have no record or if your record is mostly protests and nothing violent, then it is possible that you could be released in what in Washington state is called personal recognizance. It's called something else in another state. It's OR.
Own recognizance.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Own recognizance. Right. So PR, getting PR'd means that you don't have to give any money, but you kind of have to wait and see if they're going to let that happen. So in King County, the bail office closes at 10 p.m., but you can't post bail after 9:45, so you might as well say it closes at 9:45 p.m. So if you got arrested at an action and you actually like got arrested, the police picked you up at 7 p.m., it's possible that you could spend the night in jail. Sometimes they still will let people out. They'll let people out all night long. But if they're waiting to see if you're going to get out on PR and the PR person who does all that work has already gone home, then you might have to spend the night in jail. But you'd be spending the night in jail anyway because they wouldn't have you booked in time to get bailed out. So that's just something to consider. So it's really best to think about this before you go to an action so that you can prepare yourself for the possibility of staying overnight. The possibility of, making sure somebody has money to bail or bond you out if you do not want to wait to see if you get PR. They'll probably tell you pretty soon, though, if you are getting released on PR. So it's not like they're going to wait that. I had mentioned earlier, you can be held up to 72 hours for a misdemeanor is the maximum amount of time. They're not going to wait 70 hours and then be like, oh, we're going to PR you. Like, they'll tell you sooner, but it's just about waiting and knowing that you're going to wait, and then you're going to wait some more, and then you're probably going to hurry up and wait a little bit more. Another thing about being released on PR is that you have not yet officially been charged with a crime. Usually bail is set at your arraignment hearing, and that can be done soon after you're arrested. But when you're released on PR, you haven't had the arraignment, and so you haven't been officially charged with a crime. So your charges may come in the mail within the statute of limitations for whatever crime you were arrested for. So, for example, I was once at a protest and arrested for failure to disperse and obstruction of justice, which are both misdemeanor crimes. I was released on PR, and because those are what is called a gross misdemeanor, there's a misdemeanor and a gross misdemeanor. So with a gross misdemeanor, they have up to 2 years to charge you with a crime. So 1 year to the date after I got arrested, I received a letter in the mail from King County saying you are being charged with these crimes, and your first court date is such and such date. So that was a year that I hung out and waited until I got charged. Um, it could have been 2 years because that's what gross misdemeanor statute of limitations is. So these are things to remember as well, is that like PR is great because you get out and you don't have to pay anything, but you could have up to 2 years to just wonder when you open your mailbox to find out that you've been charged with a crime. Um, so those are just kind of the way those things go. Um,
So I'm going to throw in something just to underscore.
mhm.
If you are arrested, you can't use the cash you had in your pocket to bail yourself out. You can't necessarily contact the bonds person to do it either. That's one of the things that support people need to be doing. So I know people have said, but I have a credit card. Can I just like use it? The answer is no. They've taken all of that from you and you don't have access to it when you want to get out.
Yeah. Ooh, what's happening?
There also were a bunch of questions about, well, what about people who have medical conditions and do they get out faster? And the answer is they can, but they don't necessarily. So back to the Tacoma Block the Gates example that Kara was talking about before, the second person who we didn't have information about was a diabetic, had a bunch of other health issues, and they allowed someone to post bail for him quickly, but he still was taken to jail. And in that case, it was somebody who was known in the community and they treated him well. That would not necessarily be the case. The idea about wearing a medic alert bracelet that somebody put in there is an excellent idea. The other thing, whole long conversation about if you have conditions, carrying medications with you in original containers, which we talk about in other trainings, is the thing to do, and to have support people with those as well, so that if you don't get them, they're under no obligation to give you that medication once you've been arrested. They do, in fact, they could not. So if you're in jail, for instance, overnight, and you need meds and you get released, you want your support people or somebody to greet you when you get out with the meds you need.
Yeah, and it's really important to note, somebody said that they've been told if you need medication, it can be about 48 hours while in jail for them to verify your prescription and give it to you. That is possibly true. They also, if their jail pharmacy does not have your specific prescription, you just don't get it. Even if you've brought it in its original container and they take it out of your pockets and take it away from you, they're never going to give you your own medication. That's how institutions work. And so it is very important. You can bring like a paper copy of your prescription that might help them process all of that faster. If you are a person that really, really, really desperately needs your medication at very specific times, or you will have very serious problems, you should think very hard about where you put yourself in an action in relation to where police are, because you have no specific rights. And it could come out in court later. But if you have died or experienced some kind of really intense medical problem in that process, it doesn't matter if the cops get in trouble later in court, the result has already happened. So just think about those things pretty carefully.
Okay, there is a question about if somebody else posts bail for you, do they get it back or do you get it back? I actually don't know the answer to that. Kara, do you?
I think they usually just contact the person. Most of the contact is with the person who is in jail. And so they get it back. It's whoever, like the contact person that is written down. Somebody also said if somebody posts bail for you right away to get you out ASAP, but then you're PR'd, what happens next? You can't post bail for somebody until they're booked anyway and bail is set. So that literally can't even happen because you would be either released on PR or they would assign a bail to you. And so you wouldn't be able to pay that. Like, I don't know how. I mean, you say you've seen it happen, so maybe, sure, maybe it can happen, but usually you don't get until the booking process is complete, there isn't a bail posted. And they decide at that point if they're going to PRU or assign bail.
And again, I'm just going to underscore that whoever posts the bail or the bond isn't going to see that money potentially for, it could be up to 2 years, just so people are aware. Now, it could be, I get arrested, Kara bails me out, I go raise funds and pay Kara back while I wait then for the funds. Or maybe there is a bail fund that has been set up to accommodate that. There is currently a bail fund that's operating in Seattle that is doing a lot of work with people who are being arrested, and they're fabulous, but they don't have infinite amounts of funds, and they're not just dealing with protest folks. So there's that to consider as well.
Yeah. So one thing we were gonna do here for a quick little brainstorm for everybody, and you can just type some things in the chat. Ooh, where did I put that? Let's talk about things that we think that folks would need when they get released. So you can just brainstorm some things in the chat about what you think people would need when they get out of jail. And if you're somebody who's experienced arrest, feel free to reflect on that experience and think of things either that you would have liked to have or things that you did have that you really enjoyed, and you can share that, and you don't even have to say that you've been arrested. And that's how you know these things. But yeah, if people just want to like brainstorm some things, think about it, like what you think people would need when they get out of jail. Yeah, ride home or ride back to their car, food or a phone if theirs is dead, something good to eat. Yeah, a pet, a loved one, favorite food, tasty snacks, water, aspirin, bus token, using a cell phone, smiling friends greeting me with a ride home in the middle of the night. Yes.
Yay.
Clean clothes. Yep. Friendly faces. Emotional cats. I want an emotional cat. The ride home, access to healing resources. Yeah, hygiene products, full meals, water, clothes, therapy, definitely. Good listening from friends. Yeah. Oh, a clean mask. That's a really good one in the time of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. A Nintendo Switch. Oh, yeah, that'd be fun. A joint or a drink. I actually used to have on the support form that if people, tobacco, I asked if people had any addictions that they would need something to help with their addiction. I was asked by an organization to take that off of the form, but I personally believe that those things that people may want, if you are able to get them to them, they have just experienced something pretty bad. So I personally bring things people might ask for. Ice cream, that's a good one. Yes. Love it. Yeah, y'all have it down. Like these are definitely things to think about. And, you know, even if you don't have the form filled out where somebody wrote down, like, I want a cheeseburger, if it's your friend and you know their favorite food is a cheeseburger, bring it for them. They're definitely going to want it. If they were given any food in jail, it's probably not going to be that good. Um, yes, another person seconding on the addictions thing, especially from a harm reduction perspective. Harm reduction is really important, and it kind of goes into that like, we are not the police. We don't want to be the police, and we don't want to tell people what they can and can't do. And so you know, if you're not comfortable bringing things to people that they want, then, you know, maybe try to find somebody who is, because people do need the things they need. Somebody asked about food allergies in jail. Yeah, no, they don't care. Um, as far as I could tell, they just handed everyone, when I was in there, they just handed everyone the same sack lunch. There was a lot of trading going on. Somebody didn't want their sandwich, so I gave them my apple and had their sandwich. So I had 2 sandwiches and 0 apples. Um, so yeah, you might find that there's nothing. If you're in jail for a long time, there may be some level of attempted accommodations, but I think it depends on the place. And yeah, Ellen's saying no. So I don't think.
Yeah, not so much county jail. It might be different if you're actually sent to prison. There might be some accommodation or might not be, but it's a
Yeah.
big bureaucracy.
Yeah. And one of the things, oh yeah, somebody says they've set up a support group chat that's encrypted that has helped substantially. That's really important. Having that, like planning a debrief. If it's a planned action, you should have a debrief planned so that you can talk to everybody and make sure everyone's feeling okay and chatting about that.
Which is actually the next section we're about to go into, I think.
We
Yeah.
are, but there's one other thing I was gonna mention when we're talking about the things that you're gonna bring for your friends who are getting released. It's really important to remember that when you are standing outside the jail, not everybody being released is your friend that you know from the action. There may be people getting out of jail who don't have a support system, people who weren't at the action at all and don't care or even know about your cause. They may have just been in jail and are getting out of jail. I personally will talk to those people and offer them food and offer them, like, see if they need a ride, maybe even giving them bus fare if the idea of giving a stranger a ride home doesn't feel comfortable to you. Um, so really think about when you are having that, we always called it the jail party. You're having the little gathering outside of the jail. Remember that some of the people getting out don't have a support system. And so think about ways that you could be that support system for them. And now we can move on to
Just
Ellen.
adding to that and moving into the next little bit. You know, being arrested, being in jail is traumatic. There's no around about that. It can be very traumatizing for people. And it certainly is traumatizing for people who haven't chosen to put themselves into that situation and just are in their lives arrested. So sort of dovetailing off of what Kara said, that's important for people who are
Yeah, for the street address, 98465.
Make sure you're muted.
muted. Is everybody muted? It's important for everybody to think about that, both while you're inside and as you're coming out, and for the people around you. So one of the things when we do different kinds of training is talk about how you behave while you're in jail. And that includes being aware that there are lots of other people in jail with you who come from very different backgrounds perhaps than you do, who have very different relationships potentially to the legal system and to police. And going along with that, to be really clear that once you are back when you were arrested, if you've not just been detained but arrested, everything you say is probably being recorded, or it certainly could be being recorded. So that's true when you're arrested initially, when you're being transported, when you're being processed, and when you're being held waiting to get out. So you should pay attention to what you say about what you were just going through. And you should watch out for each other and take care of each other and yourself. And that there were a lot of like, when I get out, I want friends from smiling faces and friends and, you know, some debriefing. That's important to take care of yourself and to ask for support when you need it, both inside and outside. Kara already talked about the whole question of If you have been arrested, checking your mail and watching email potentially for communications from the court. You don't want to be in the position of missing a court date unintentionally. And for people who are those supporters who all poured out to greet you when you came out, there's a lot you can do and help. Some people are trauma specialists and can help people after they're out, checking in on them. You might, if your friend was arrested, and you might want to check in on them the next day. If it's a larger action, you might want to have a plan of how people are going to check people out. Again, teams, affinity groups, buddies are really important for that. And it's also, if it's a larger action and there's going to be subsequent court things, to pull people together as much as possible to try and figure out what happened and how in a secure way, whether that's an encrypted method of something or other, or an in-person, socially distanced these days, conversation that people can have with each other. Right now, most of the people who have been arrested in Seattle, it seems like there may not be charged. There are people that are being charged, but the people who have done sort of what the prosecutors are classifying as nonviolent crimes aren't being charged. That could change, both for the people who have been arrested the last 5 months, but also going forward into November. We don't know what's going to happen. So the sort of checking in with people once people are out as a support person is doubly important. I think that's all I was going to say on this little bit, and Kara's going to talk a little bit about debriefing, and then we're going to see what questions are left, I think.
Yeah, and I think luckily we've already kind of mentioned it, like the debrief is really important to make sure, especially if you've gone out with a group of friends, kind of think about ways, things that worked well for you in the action, things that didn't, things to learn. Roses and thorns is a really good framework for this, where roses are things that were good, thorns are things that were a little prickly, and you can even add in buds, which are growth opportunities. So think about that, really, like checking in with everybody, and to help make plans for the future if you have been arrested. Like, you know, are folks who were arrested going to want to go to trial? Are they going to want to go to trial and be like co-defendants? Or do some people want to go to trial and some people want to take a plea deal? These are all things to really talk about with the folks that you know if you got arrested together. And, you know, if you haven't received any official charges, then you can assess your interest in moving forward. One of the things that people often ask are, if you got released on PR and so you haven't been officially charged, does that mean you can't do other actions where you might get arrested? And that's really up to you. I know someone who one summer when we we did a lot of climate actions, and then this person was also involved in a lot of actions related with the group Stop the Sweeps is where I worked with them. And this person was arrested like 3 times within 4 months and released on PR every time. And so it did not affect at all that there had been previous arrests. That may not always be the case. And so that's really up to you to decide. I know for me, because I don't agree with this racist, horrendous system, I just kept doing the same things I would normally do, even as I was waiting to get charged. I did a direct action. Yeah. So, you know, it kind of just depends on what you want to do. And if you are willing to, if you get charged for something else, then get like the initial charges put back on. That's for you to think about. One example that we like to tell of a story of how you can get charged kind of at different times is we had a really big action one May with 350 Seattle, where we shut down 13 Chase Bank branches in one day all across the city of Seattle. And people got arrested at a few of those different locations. We had 26 people arrested that day. And eventually charges started coming in for some of them. But in the end, all 26 of them did not get charged. It was maybe like 10. Maybe it was around 10. I forget, because 2 went to trial, 4 took a plea deal, and there was like 4 or 6 at the other location. I don't know. But so out of the 26 that got arrested that day, all within the same city, but at different locations, they didn't all get charges. Some people went there 2 years and never got charged. So it's just kind of, you never really know. And as Ellen mentioned, right now, the King County prosecutor is not charging people for misdemeanors, but that could change at any moment. And actually, that situation is what helped my charges get dropped for my case from January 2019 that I got charged. My charges came in the mail in January 2020, and then COVID happened and all these delays kept happening. And then this whole uprising happened and the cops are being shown to be violent and really awful. And so it helped my charges get dropped, which was really surprising. As somebody mentioned in the chat, sometimes if you have a lot of priors, they will keep you in longer or treat you worse or separate you out. And that is very true. It depends on, how they want to treat you, and they get to decide. And it's really up to the individual officer, honestly. The system can do what it wants.
And again, just to emphasize the support side of that, knowing that somebody has those priors helps in figuring out whether they're being delayed and held up potentially. So telling people that in a confidential way really helps if you're the person outside trying to figure out why so-and-so isn't getting out.
Yeah. So it's definitely a good time for questions. And this one that just came up in the chat, if you get arrested and protest while in jail, can that legally count against you? I'm not sure what exactly you mean by protesting in jail, because can't really, well, you can protest in jail, but you're in jail, so they will treat you badly. They will put you in solitary confinement. You could get beaten by a guard. I would not really suggest protesting in jail. There are really a lot of documented cases and instances of people in jail going on hunger strike. So that is a type of in-jail protest, and typically that's more at detention centers or in prisons. There's a rich history of that. I invite you all to look that up and learn about those types of protests. But really, when you're in like the county jail, they're just going to hold you longer or put you in solitary or like try to mess you up. So it would probably legally count against you, and that they would keep you in jail longer. They could add charges to charge you with obstruction. And someone said, kind of related, and then I'll go back to the next question. I've also heard that if they think there's a protest outside the jail, like your support system is there being loud, it can delay your release. Not really, because they can't, it really won't. They have this whole process that they go through.
I would also add, from a political standpoint, sometimes it has the opposite effect. It may not have the effect with the people in the jail system that are processing you. I agree with Kara, but it might impact Pete Holmes or other people externally who are, from the political standpoint, sort of calling the shots on some level.
Yeah, and like there are, every New Year's Eve, there's a noise demo outside the youth jail to show the youth that we love them and support them, and that we don't think that they should be locked in cages. And no, they don't ever get in trouble or punished from that. It's just the people outside are doing something, and it's not really connected to people inside. Um, and I still see the narrative question. I'm going to answer this one question just because it's faster. With respect to securing your device with a password versus biometrics, is that state law, federal law, or both? I was unsure given the exceptions the federal government has within proximity to an international border. So that is both. Like it is state, federal, whatever. Do not use biometrics to secure your device. Convenience is not worth it. It's just not worth it. So it's both until there's some kind of legal precedent set. But do you really want to be that person that sets that legal precedent? Probably not.
So before we go to the question, which is the narrative, I want to ask people if they have jail support questions. I feel like we went into a little bit about more this time about what it's like being in jail and being arrested and those sorts of things. But I want to honor the fact that this is also about the support and see if there are questions about that piece while we go ahead and answer this. And there may not be.
Oh, there is. Let's see. How is remote jail support typically organized? By the organizers of the action or a separate org that provides this type of support on an as-needed basis, analogous to the NLG? And what's the best way to find out opportunities to engage in this kind of support? I would say it kind of depends. You know, like Ellen and I have mentioned a couple of times, like we've done a lot of this with organizations and like organized actions where we really specify like we're going to take this action. And a lot of what's happening right now is just it's an uprising. Like it's not planned necessarily. So it's organized to the extent that the action is organized. It's, you know, if a group is planning to go out to something that's happening right now, they may decide to have jail support organized. But as far as I know right now, a lot of the people organizing the things that are happening are very new to this work. And so they don't even think about a lot of the pieces of organizing an action. And so there's not been a lot of jail support set up. There is a group called Puget Sound Prisoner Support that has been doing jail support as long as I've been active in the streets of Seattle, which is for me since 2014. I'm not from here, but PSPS has been around for a long time, and they have different ways that they engage. And so, really, you know, they're just kind of like on it and paying attention. And there's been a lot of demos over the years and like anti-police protests that weren't organized by any organization. And PSPS is still kind of been on top of it. So it's, again, it's just like how it gets organized.
And PSPS has been showing up with like ready cash for people to bail people out. You know, again, capacity and amount. The same is true of the Northwest Community Bail Fund, I believe. There's a form, you can look them up. There's a form that you can fill out. Yeah. I will also say that because this is not organized in the one main set of organizers or organization doing things, it is a little bit ad hoc. I know that I have often been, as somebody sitting at home monitoring things, the sort of backup support person for people I know who are out in the streets. So people ask me if I will, you know, track them and do something if something happens. And, you know, yes. And thus far, in that case, I haven't had to go bail anybody out or do that level, but that's part of the working with buddies and in a team or an affinity group or your family or whatever else, which right now is kind of key.
Yeah, and then somebody asked if it's helpful to contact all the groups, NLG, PSPS, and the Northwest Community Bail Fund, all about the same arrest. No, that's like too many hands in the pot sort of thing. Just pick one. And that's kind of where it's good to like build relationships and know your community and kind of know like, do you have contacts in the NLG? Do you have contacts in one of these other groups? Or, you know, how are they being supported? So just pick one, and then, you know, they're often in contact with each other anyway because they're doing a lot of the same work.
And I'll just throw in again the whole question of being in jail for anybody is not a good experience. Being in jail for some people is way worse than for other people. And I know that all of these organizations try to make it their priority to make sure they're attending to people who need it the most. I'm worried about Black folks and Indigenous folks and people of color who are in the midst of all of this. I'm worried about a trans person who's going to be put in a population that they're not safe in because of how the system is dealing with them, and wanting to make sure that the resources that we as a larger community have go to those folks first before they go to those of us who maybe can sit it out for a little while and wait. And just to be as support people or as friends and loved ones of people who are in jail, to be conscious of that and not jumping up and down and saying, but my friend needs to get out right now. And understand that we are better as a larger community and more effective as a larger community about what we're all out there about if we can understand that together and prioritize those folks first.
Agreed. I think now we can go through the narrative, probably. Yeah, because it probably would take about, somebody had asked, is it possible to talk through the narrative step by step from arrest through booking and jailing to discharge? Do you want to do it? Okay, well, I guess I may have been most recently experiencing this. So basically when you will get arrested, and then at that point, they can either take you to one of the precincts for some of the pre-booking process, or they will take you straight to the jail. It can kind of depend where you're arrested, or how many people are being arrested with you or at that time. At the Chase Bank actions, first people were being taken to the precincts first. And when they realized this was happening all over the city, they just started taking people straight to county. So in my experience, I did get first taken to, I don't know, because it was in the back of one of those vans and you're handcuffed and there's no windows. So it was somewhere, I was trying to like map the streets downtown when we turned, but I don't know, somewhere downtown. And we were each, they took all of our stuff and they searched everything with us standing there and like looked at everything and took the stuff away from us and said we could get it out of the evidence locker in Soto eventually. And then they put us in these individual cells, and you just stand in that cell handcuffed for some amount of time. I was arrested with 3 other people, so we were each 4 in individual cells. After a while, we got taken from there and then taken to actual county jail. And in county jail, they take you in, and I don't remember if it was first they ask you a bunch of questions or first they make you change your clothes. But one of those things you do have to go put on jail clothes, um, and then put your clothes in a bag or something. And then they take your phone. They've had all this stuff taken out of your pockets. And then you go and you sit in this holding cell with any number of people. I was in there with one other person that I'd been arrested with, and then more people. Some were already in there, some kept going in. And in that time, you just kind of wait, and then they'll call you out for various things. Um, they called me out to tell me about some prison rape act that they have to tell you about. And so they just read me this thing and then told me to go sit back in the little room. Then they called me out and I went to see a nurse, and they just, you know, took vitals and asked some questions. And then I had to go back and sit in the room. They called me out again and I got the picture and the fingerprinting. And then I had to go sit back in the room. And then they called me out again. And I talked to somebody about PR, and they asked me a bunch of questions and asked if I would want a lawyer or a public defender, and said that whatever I said I wanted, I would still have to go through a different survey for. And so then I went back and sat in the room. Yeah, somebody pointed out the whole time you're in the holding cell, there's a monitor playing videos. There's no quiet. It's the same video over and over. There is a toilet in there that is very much open to everyone. I mean, there's like a short little wall next to it. I did not need to use it while I was in there. But if you do need to use that, it is there, and you're just using it in front of whoever else is in there with you. And so this was a lot of back and forth. And then eventually the PR person called me out again and said, you're going to be released on PR whenever we get to it. So then it was some more time. And at some point in there, I was given the code to make some phone calls. So I made the phone calls. And yeah, then eventually after more waiting and waiting, they said, okay, you're going to be released. So you walk to a spot, they give you your clothes back, and you change out of the jail clothes, and then they give you your little pouch of things. Like I had a cell phone, and maybe my keys had been in my pocket and not my backpack. So then, and that's an important note, is I had been arrested. I was actually at the protest as a street medic, and so I had my backpack and my like fanny pack pouch, and there that stuff got taken, the backpack and fanny pack got taken to the evidence locker, and the only thing I was able to have on me when I got released was my phone and maybe my keys that were in my pocket. So the only things that were in my pocket were what I got back. So that's it. That's really the whole process. Somebody else said as soon as you're told you're being released, you can't make calls, so you can't call to tell someone. And that's true. This was a situation where people had seen me get arrested, called people that knew what's up and knew what to do. So when I got out, there were people waiting for me. Somebody had a charger so I could charge my phone and call my housemate and ask him to come pick me up. So that's the whole process. How does support know when you're being released? Somebody asked. They really kind of don't unless they've been in contact with lawyers. Or they can, be looking. If you're refreshing that jail website, it will say the time you're released. Ellen wants to say something.
So the question about when do people go as support down to the jail is kind of an open-ended question. There's not one answer. Sometimes it appears that people are starting to be released, particularly if people are released in or arrested in a large group, and you think, oh good, everybody's going to get out in the next hour. And in fact, that's not maybe how it works. Maybe it's the next 3 or 4 hours that people trickle out. So it is, particularly these days, it's about being ready to hang out safely someplace so that, somebody just said release time is totally unreliable. You cannot tell, basically. So if you have the capacity, or people you're working with have the capacity to go hang out at a certain point and wait for people, that's the best thing to do. Alternately is to wait for somebody to call, but then you're stuck down there waiting for somebody to come pick you up, as Kara just described.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is now 9:01, and we said we'd be done at 9. So I think we will close there. Some good stuff in the chat asking about if support needs to help people get evidence from SOTO. Yes, that's helpful. They are only open Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 to 5, so rides and such could be good. Yeah, thanks, everybody.
We will be sending out an email with some of this information and links. Just as you go, we want to thank everybody for hanging in for this. If you, as you go, want to type anything about what you're taking away with you, like a thought of what you've learned, taking away with you. We appreciate the thanks, but any feedback, as we said at the beginning, we're not used to doing this online, so any ideas or suggestions, either now or at some subsequent time, we'd be happy to hear.
Yeah.
And thanks to our tech assist there, Neil.
Yes, thank you.
And everybody be safe out there.
Yes.